Will Florida be under the gun by yet another I storm in the tropical Atlantic, less than 1 year from the catastrophic impact of Hurricane Ian late September 2022? We're going to find out. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the latest iteration of Weather Center Nazario. Today I come bearing critical information that I really need to communicate to all of you tuning in. As I mentioned during the intro, it looks like Florida may have to be on the lookout for yet another I tropical storm, if not a hurricane, on the near-distant horizon. Today I would like to take a deep dive into all the latest information to include all of our 0Z and 12Z model runs that have now come in that I'm looking to digest with you, and we'll collectively sift through all these new details to make sense of what it is we have to watch out for over the next 7 to 10 days. Folks, if you can do me a huge solid, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel if you like this update, if you enjoy all of my content herein and thereafter, which to include all the numerous updates to come over the next 2 weeks, depending on what takes shape in the Western Caribbean. Now that we've covered our bases, ladies and gentlemen, let's fasten those seatbelts and jump right in. Okay, folks, wasting no time, we are starting out on NHC's homepage. However, I caution you to take this as the current state of reality. I definitely predict and anticipate that this is going to be changing over the next few days, and I'll show you exactly why before I go on to a long-winded spiel. However, we're still looking at a pretty good amount of activity. Harold has officially made landfall and is dumping a tremendous amount of rain and increasing the amount of tornadic activity we're seeing in southern and central Texas today. Franklin is also at almost a dead stop in the central Caribbean, preparing for his turn to the north and his exit out of the Caribbean Sea. Gert, I swear, Gert is just scratching a name off the list, unfortunately. Gert's just chilling, kind of kicking it. I believe this is, it's post-tropical cyclone Gert, probably one of the last advisories we'll see from that entity out there in the tropics. What we are going to focus on is what is likely going to take shape in the Western Caribbean. I'm not backpedaling on this, folks. I'm not going to backpedal on it. I'm not trying to raise the alarm either. I'm trying to simply bring awareness. I will admit there might be a little bit of hype in my voice, but that's only because the situation is escalating on a day-by-day basis. This time last week, the Canadian model was indicating a potential threat of something forming up in the very Western Caribbean, just to the east of the Yucatan Peninsula and working its way north. Okay, we're not going to spend any more time on here. We're going to Weather Nerds. Weather Nerds is one of my favorite websites to look at the ensemble members, and folks, it goes without saying, look at everything that I'm paying attention to over the state of Florida, over Central Florida in particular. Some want to take it into the Panhandle, the Big Bend area, but if you look closely, our source region, just as I mentioned in a video previous to this, is going to be that extreme Western Caribbean. We have something popping off in the Pacific monsoonal trough, working its way to the north, where I believe it's finally going to undergo cyclogenesis. The dynamics in play in terms of all levels of the environment are very susceptible to further tropical strengthening. So I definitely think, especially with all the different model platforms in agreement that something along the lines of a tropical feature is going to develop, we're going to see something over the next few days. We're going to rapidly transition over to the model viewer on weathermodels.com. This is going to be why I think NHC's predictions over the next 7 days are going to be changing. This is the overnight Euro from last night. It goes without saying, folks, take a look at this first panel right here. We already have upwards of 70-75% probability that something in the form of a tropical system is going to be moving across Central America. As it moves across Central America, I do anticipate it's going to be severely eroded. There's a lot of mountainous terrain out there. That's a lot of terrain in general, a lot of landscape that it has to make it over. However, I'm going to go forward to 96 hours, and you can see the Euro wants to increase the probabilities. I'll turn you over to the map legend. As you can see, there is even a small corridor of upwards of 80 to 85% likelihood that at least a tropical depression is going to form in our Western Caribbean. And I'll tell you guys, it only has one direction it's going to go. It only has one direction, and I'll show you exactly what parameters I'm looking at to suggest that. As we go forward in time, you can see some of the models want to take it over the Yucatan Peninsula, and before then it becomes a bit of a broad brush scenario. But at the tail end, at 216 hours out, you could draw, if you were to just draw a line with the probabilities, you're looking at something possibly impacting the western coast of Florida, or as far westward as the Big Bend, Tallahassee area, or it could possibly jog a little further east into the Central Florida area, which we're all very familiar with. Okay, so now that we've discussed probabilities, let's move on. Going to work our way into, as a matter of fact, this is tropical storm probabilities, excuse me. I wanted to show you because the Euro is also looking at the potential of a tropical storm, albeit very scarce, very low. We're looking at a 15-20% chance, but there's still indications that something could be organizing in our Gulf of Mexico before turning its sights on the state of Florida. Now, this is going to be the latest run of the Euro, the precipitable water in the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. I have this zoomed in AOI because I want you to pay close attention to what works its way out of the Western Caribbean. I probably should have used a better ink for that. I'm drawing in reds with red. I'm going to go over to black, and I'm going to draw a nice big old circle right in through here. This is where I want all of you watching this to fixate on as I scroll through this loop. Okay, I'm going to start at the 72-hour point. This is the 25th of August. This is the end of this week, okay? Today is the 22nd. Tuesday. This is 3 days from now. This is when I believe we're going to see whatever type of system this is begin to unveil itself over the Western Caribbean after making its trek over Central America. As I scroll through in time, this is again the latest run of the Euro. I'm not looking at anything in the past. This is as of now. 12 Zulu on the 22nd. Take a look at what shows up. You begin to see something organizing, deepening, doing its trademark Western Cuba push before making its way directly into the peninsula of Florida. We have something, and I'll go ahead and draw some makeshift streamlines. We have something working its way pretty much centered over Lake Okeechobee on the 30th of August. Again, this is the very tail end of the 12Z Euro, so this is not official. This is not ultimately what's going to happen, but this has been trending. This has been on the models, especially now the Euro, 3 different instances going on 4 different instances. 6 and 18 Zulu of the European model does not go as far out as we can see on this model run. However, there are indications and little whispers that there is a precip field that begins to develop a bit of cyclonic rotation in the Western Caribbean before making its path up to the north, okay? Moving on from this slide, we're going to go over to the Canadian model. The Canadian model has been sniffing at this for over a week now. I'm going to say it, over a week now, okay? I believe it was 0Z last Tuesday when something was indicated forming up in the Western Caribbean and pushing through the Gulf, and it has been extremely consistent. Extremely. I'm putting emphasis on that. Extremely consistent run to run. It is not deviated from this. It hasn't taken anything wide left or wide right, okay? It's always been on a direct path towards the state of Florida. And the reason I'm amping this up is because I have not seen that level of consistency with any model all hurricane season. Guys, every single model platform this year, especially with the erroneous tropical season we've had up to this point, we went from 0 to 100 over the last 7 to 10 days. The models have been struggling or running behind with the systems that have formed up, whether it be in the main development region, in the Caribbean, or now we have Harold moving inland over Texas. It took its time to catch up to all these systems, and I believe we are finally caught up, and the Euro and the Canadian model are singing the same tune. I'll also pan over to the icon later. We'll get into that. Icon's picking up something as well. So as I go through, this is 850 Vorticity. Vorticity is really going to do a great job of highlighting it. I want to say there is a bit of distrust in me personally for the most recent run of the Canadian model, and I'll explain to you why. So you can see already we have a tremendous amount of lower heights across the Yucatan, over the Bay of Campeche, some vorticity couplets already working their way northward through the Western Caribbean. As I go through time, you'll see why I have a little bit of distrust in this. So here comes our first feature. You can see the model wants to break something spinning off of that giant upper low situated just to the north of our Yucatan Peninsula. So there would be technically circulation number 1. And this is exactly why I take this with a grain of salt, that ever so lovely catchphrase. This would be feature number 1, making landfall over northern Florida, the northern peninsula of Florida. As I go through time, watch that one closely. See what I'm talking about here. This is now 18 Zulu on August 30th. There's another feature wrapping up and kicking out towards the state of Florida. And as we go through time, you get another one that wants to form up, deepen, and then head in that same general direction. Here's number 3. So, guys, am I saying this is what's going to happen? We're going to have a triple barrel low setup? I don't think so. I don't think we're going to see something of that nature. I mean, would I be excited to see it? Absolutely. That'd be an anomaly in Mother Nature for sure. Do I think it's going to happen? No. But what I'm trying to get at here is we have 2 fairly reliable model platforms with a general consensus that the Caribbean AOR is hot. The Caribbean AOR is hot for something, and we're going to definitely have to keep our eyes peeled over the next 72, 96 hours to see if whatever these models are indicating is going to make its way into the Caribbean and start to rapidly intensify, okay? And I'll tell you why I'm saying rapidly intensify as well. Here is the 0Z European model, if I'm not mistaken. This is going to be 700 millibars. So for those of you still watching, the reason I have 700 millibars up is over recent weeks, and especially over the last week, looking at all the systems we have active in the Atlantic Basin, it seems that 850, 700, and up to 500 to an extent have been a great first glance in determining the steering pattern for these storms. And this is why we want to pay attention to this, especially if we do get something organizing. There's nothing out there yet. This hasn't even been fruitioned into existence yet. So take everything that I'm saying with the infamous grain of salt. We'll Salt Bay it a little bit. Take it with a grain of salt. We don't have anything in reality just yet, although the Euro is highlighting a tremendous amount of circulation in that monsoonal trough with this piece beginning to break away and make its way into the Western Caribbean. That's not what I'm paying attention to here, okay? We're going to look at steering patterns. So we have our ridge, our subtropical ridge, responsible for driving Hillary into the west coast and wrapping its moisture all the way around through the apex of the ridge, the northern central plains of the United States, or the northern Great Plains, I should say, into the Great Lakes, and eventually over to the east coast. They'll probably see residual moisture from Hillary after having made landfall. But let's go ahead and do this. We're going to do some doodling, guys. We have our ridge. It's centered over the Texarkana, Oklahoma area, kind of getting into the Appalachians a little bit. We're definitely over the Mississippi Valley at this point. We'll say the greater Mississippi Valley is where our ridge is in place, okay? Pay attention to that anticyclonic rotation. Reason I bring this up is that's exactly what's driving Franklin away from any major landmass. We have him exiting DR Haiti and moving to the north. You can see all these northerly winds flowing off the coast. We have an associated frontal system down at the surface. That's what this yellow straight line of upward vertical motion is indicating. If I were to draw it down to the surface, there would be a cold front passing through and a trough aloft, helping to work its way off the coast. That's what's going to pick Tropical Storm Franklin up and kick them out into the greater Atlantic area, posing no harm, no foul to any major landmass like the United States, or even the Bahamas for that matter. I believe Bermuda should come out unscathed, but we're keeping an eye on that as well because it's going to come dangerously close, okay? So, you can see the ridge is still in place. However, we're starting to see a westward march in this system. As of now, we still have northerly to northeasterly winds coming across the Carolinas, Virginia, Georgia, with a bit of a neutral point, a call. I can finally draw on this. On Weather Center Nazario number 1 or 2, I believe I finally mentioned something about a neutral point, a call in the wind flow. I can finally doodle that for you. There is our system. We have vorticity starting to show itself at 700 millibars over the extreme western Caribbean, so we're starting to see that early development. Let's go forward in time a little bit further. I'm going to stop the clock at about 144 hours out so I can show you exactly what's changed. There we go. So now we have easterly wind flow over top the state of Florida. We have westerly winds over the Carolinas. We have Franklin here churning on up, headed to the north as our ridge out in the Atlantic begins to move closer and closer to that system, driving it north away from any major landmass. Our ridge is now over the panhandle of Texas. The reason I bring this up is because this is going to influence where whatever this area of organized convection is on the models, that's going to influence its forward progress. Now let's fast forward to when things get a little dicey. Let's walk it out to near the end of the model run. Big change. Massive change. So I'm gonna go ahead and increase the size of my pen here just to reinforce the emphasis I'm putting on this. We have southerly flow all through this region. We have southerly environmental flow with north-northeasterly winds on the other side of it. That is because our ridge is now no longer even in the picture. It is now over western Conus and pushing towards the Pacific. As a result, we're going to have a trough axis, a long wave trough at 200-300 millibars coming in with a supported frontal boundary. I'm actually going to show you Weather Prediction Site, their surface analysis, to give you a better picture of what I'm talking about. But that is why we have a textbook situation where if something does form And forgive me, guys, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm looking straight into the camera. I am not an official source. This is based on just experience, not only as a synoptic analyst during my time in the United States Air Force, but just over recent years looking at tropical features, especially Hurricane Ian, as closely as I scrutinized that, even hearkening back to Hurricane Charlie back in 2004, okay? Reason I want to pay close attention to this is if I were to draw a projected window of movement, albeit very, 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 very rough. I am not an official source. This is exactly what I would draw if I were National Hurricane Center. Anywhere in this general area, we are likely to see this storm move, especially if we get a potent enough jet max to deepen that long wave trough, really support a somewhat potent cold front. I say potent loosely because we are still in the summertime, so we're not going to be seeing frigid temperatures working their way down into the southeast of the United States, but you get the picture. If we get a strong enough cold front, one that's not going to stall out over Northern Carolina or North Carolina, Tennessee, over the Central Plains, something that gets its way down to the Gulf Coast states, as you can see as we go forward in time, the model wants to push our system towards the panhandle of Florida as a Cat 1, Cat 2 hurricane. This is like clockwork. These systems tend to do that a lot. Anytime we have something forming up in the Western Caribbean, especially August through September and even parts of October, you have the setup to where anything down here is just going to move north. Far and few between do we see anything in the Caribbean kick out over the Yucatan and head towards Texas, Louisiana. Most of the time, especially a la Ian last year, it's very eerie that this could possibly be our eye storm, Idalia. Ian and Idalia forming up over the next week, maybe 10, 12 days out, okay? Now that I'm done here, let's talk about dynamics influencing this storm. We already have the warm sea surface temperatures. We have the ocean heat content over the Caribbean and just to the north of Cuba. So depending upon where this thing wobbles, if it does get its act together, that's going to play a role. We're switching gears, going to the 0Z Euro, looking at precipitable water. Dry air has been a big thing in terms of Saharan dust. There is a little bit of an inhibiting factor with that frontal system coming off the coast. With fronts, you typically see wind shear. So in this case, if we do have a storm, a Cat 1, Cat 2 hurricane, working its way towards the state of Florida, that is going to be on our side. We're going to be looking at that. So, going to pause right here. This is 12 Zulu, August 28th. There's our frontal system, guys. That's what I was talking about. We have our trough aloft up at 200, 300, 500 millibars coming in. This dry air is associated with that cold polar air upstream of that front as it comes down. We have a little bit of residual dry air, probably more than likely remnant dust that's still floating around in the upper levels of the atmosphere, trying to hang on for dear life. But with the amount of moisture influx we're going to see from the Caribbean, from the southern periphery of the Bay of Campeche, and from the monsoonal trough over the Pacific, I don't think that's going to be a major player in this case. And you can kind of even see it beginning to wane a little bit as we go forward in time. We get really good wraparound moisture, and this is why I'd mentioned previously why I drew that projected window of movement the way I did. This is what the European model is anticipating that front is going to do. If I were to do just a very broad level surface analysis, that's where I would draw my frontal boundary. It looks like we could be going stationary up against the Appalachians, a little bit of cold air damming going on along the coast, but then we have that western extent of the front swooping around over Louisiana, parts of Texas, into Mississippi. That is why I believe we're going to see some variation with this. The European model for 12 Zulu, the operational run anyway, is coming in as we speak. I'm going to take a look at that after this video. I'll be doing a live stream, so folks, if you want to tune in for that, please tune in. We're going to be talking all about this. Other weather channels are picking up on it as well, so I'm not the only one singing and dancing about it. That is why I think we're going to have to pay attention, because experience leads me to believe we're going to see somewhat of a further eastern deviation, especially if this thing can pick up some momentum. Weaker systems, as we've all preached, don't tend to be influenced by outside influences. In this case, the bigger the system, the bigger the influence. So anything. Hurricane Charlie was teetered a couple of miles thanks to a stationary front that was situated over the Gulf of Mexico, and that changed everything in terms of his impacts back in 2004. Let's go on to wind shear. This is a very long video. I apologize for those of you still watching. Wind shear is not going to be a major factor here, okay? As we go forward in time, this is the 27th, working our way into the 28th. We start to see some exhaust from that system in the form of that anticyclonic spin near that 1,005 millibar low. And as you can see, the Gulf of Mexico almost to its entirety. We have a small channel of winds just to its north, not playing a huge role in determining its intensity. it's going to evacuate pretty much all of our wind shear because we have that trough upstream. Because we have another trough digging down, there's no leftover residual feature in the Gulf or anywhere in proximity to that to really influence the level of shear that would tear apart the likes of, we'll say, Harold even, or Franklin is a wonderful example of that. So as it moves through the Caribbean, it's going to be nearly unimpeded until that trough and associated cold front can work their way down to the southeast. It's kind of a timing game. If we do get something to get the ball rolling, if the pins, or I should say the cards, the dominoes start to fall, there it is, that's what I was looking for, the dominoes. If the dominoes begin to fall, it's going to be a matter of time. All of it is timing. Right now, we're looking at about 7 to 10 days, maybe even a little further than that into the future, so it's anybody's guess, but we've been seeing this in the trends. The models have been persistent in highlighting that, hey, we got to start watching. We're going to go to one last panel of the European model, and then I'm going to show you Weather Prediction Center's future cast, or what we used to call in the Air Force the Mach analysis. I'm not too sure why we're dealing with a little bit of a lag. Here we go. Okay, so we're looking at CONUS now. This is going to highlight, this is 500 millibar geopotential heights. Going back to what I'd mentioned previously with that 700 millibar chart, this is what's going to be influencing where this system may track if we decide to see it come together. I'm going to rewind it in time. I'm going to draw two different pieces. I'm going to draw two different indicators. Okay, I'm going to start with, we'll use dark blue, and I'll get my pen out. Here is our ridge. Here's our high height center, which is responsible for the heat wave that most of the United States is feeling the effects of as we speak, okay? Let's go forward in time. I'm going to swipe right real fast. Boom. And I'm going to take a red marker this time and show you exactly what has changed. Look at the transition to the west that we've seen from our ridge, our protective ridge for that matter. As you can see now, we have winds of the jet aloft spilling over its apex, and we have a trough axis digging south. There's our bad boy in the Caribbean exiting into the Gulf of Mexico and headed north. Depending on how these features interact, we could see it continue a due north track towards Alabama, Mississippi, the extreme western panhandle of Florida. If we get a bit more of a potent system and we get a little bit more of a jet max to enter the upstream channel of that trough and deepen it ever so slightly more, I'll change ink one more time. I know my page is getting a little cluttered. Roll with me. We could see a bit more of an eastward fetch with this. As you saw in the precipitable water for 12 Zulu. 12 Zulu Euro is indicating more of a central South Florida impact as opposed to a northern Florida impact. So, guys, Florida, we got to watch. Florida, we're looking at the potential of another hurricane working their way through here. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you have not started preparing or if you have not even considered preparing for a hurricane, whether it be a Cat 1, a Cat 2, or another Ian, borderline Cat 5, let's start at least dusting off our hurricane preparedness plans and, just keep an eye out. Folks like myself and other wonderful YouTube channels out there are going to keep you in the loop. We're going to keep monitoring this very closely, but the reason I'm making such a long-winded spiel on this is because everything's lining up. Earlier in the year, GFS was highlighting certain things making landfall along the southeastern United States. There was no real reality to that. GFS likes to go into la-la land, especially once you get past 275 hours into that forecast run. So we really didn't think twice. This is having a lot of us weather analysts, prior forecasters, degreed meteorologists taking a second, third, if not even a fourth look at this because things are lining up to suggest we may have something on our hands in the next 7 to 10 days, okay? We're going to start concluding Weather Center Nazario with a look at Weather Prediction Center, okay? I haven't pulled this up before, but I used to look at Weather Prediction Center a lot during our collaborations doing synoptic analysis during my time in the Air Force. Great resource. This kind of is a wonderful tool to use to coin a mentor of mine, Mr. Shane Castle out in Tucson, Arizona. How did we get here? So this is where we sit right now. This is the latest analysis. You can kind of see we have a big ridge sitting over top. That's why our frontal system is draped over the apex of it, not really making its way too far south. We'll fast forward towards the end of the week. We'll go to 12 Zulu Friday. You can see that we're starting to see a shift in the pattern because our fronts are starting to move a little bit further south. With each surface front, you can best believe we have vorticity at 500 millibars and a jet just above 500 millibars supporting these systems. And where you have jets, you have troughs, you have cold fronts. Let's work our way through prime time, 12Z on Monday. Look at where that front is. That front is down over the Gulf Coast states. And on 12Z Tuesday, we begin to see, at least their projection as of right now, that front working its way into the Gulf. So we got to watch. If we get a system form up where we're thinking, or I should say where the models are indicating, multiple models, ICON, GFS is whispering at it, Canadian model, I've even looked at the UK Met. The UK Met is kind of hinting at something, at least an organized wave of precip, and especially the Euro. If we get something down there in a favorable situation, in a favorable position, we may have another Central Florida impact to look out for in the coming days, okay? And it'll tap into that hot water out there. So it's anybody's guess what happens with this system. I'm going to say it early before we get to the conclusion. Thank you all if you've made it to this far in the video. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for listening to my long-winded speech about all things tropical. Things are getting a little more exciting, especially since we are stationed in Central Florida, so be prepared. I'm going to get a lot more rigorous, as I mentioned in previous episodes of Weather Center Nazario, with these updates and live streams. And if we do get something pushing towards, Florida, you best believe I'm going to have round-the-clock coverage on it, okay, especially as we near potential impact. Again, this is in the future. I'm not manifesting it. I'm not fear-mongering. I'm not hyping, because I know that tends to happen with certain weather YouTube channels, so take this with a grain of salt. However, based on my experience and what I see in the big picture weather pattern, it's worth looking at. It's worth talking about. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and start concluding. All right, everybody, I'm going to keep the conclusion very short, very simple. Thank you all so much for tuning in today. You can expect a continuous string of updates over the coming days, especially as whatever we may be seeing down there over the Caribbean, working its way in from the Pacific monsoonal trough, starts to show itself. You definitely can anticipate I'm going to be starting to pop up on your feed a lot more often. Let's keep our eyes peeled. Let's continue to watch the tropics. We are just now getting into the peak of hurricane season, so we still have a long road ahead, ladies and gentlemen. Until next time, this is Weather Center Nazario, signing